everybody, this is your girl, Megan Thee Stallion, aka the Hot Girl Coach, reporting live with the future president of the United States.
Everybody.
What do you have to say to the American people?
We are not going back.
Stallion took to the stage to headline Harris's Georgia rally, a state which the Democrats are hoping will swing their way. Harris took aim at Donald Trump in front of the cheering crowd, challenging him to a debate.
So here's the thing. Here's the funny thing about that. So he won't debate, but he and his running mate sure seem to have a lot to say about me. I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage.
Watch out, Kamala Harris. With all of this cringy behavior, you're on your way to becoming the next laughingstock of the Democrat Party, just like Hillary Clinton was. Now you might be asking yourself, what behavior I'm talking about? Well, at a campaign rally for Kamala in Georgia this week, Vice President Harris appeared to have suddenly acquired a new accent. Throughout the majority of her speech, Kamala spoke in her normal voice, but as she got more enthusiastic, her voice suddenly took a massive change. One that was very noticeable at the end of her speech when she talked about Georgia helping the Democrats win the election in 2020. In that moment, Kamala said, "And you helped us win in 2020, and we're going to do it again in 2024. Only that's not how she said it. For some reason, VP Harris felt the need to add a bit of twang to her accent and drop a couple of syllables so that she ended up saying, "We gon' do it again in 2024? Normally, this wouldn't be that big of a deal, since, as you know, Southern twang is a real thing in the United States. The problem here is that Kamala never had it in her voice, and she appeared to only be using it to feel closer to the voters in Georgia, but it turned out to have the opposite effect. After Kamala's speech, viewers and journalists alike all flocked to X, formerly known as Twitter, to discuss how strange Kamala's accent really was. While some accounts, like an account named End Wokeness, posted the clip mentioning Kamala's new accent, others mocked her for butchering the accent, with one even saying, "Not sure what accent she was going for, but that's not how anyone in Atlanta sounds." But I think one of the most insightful comments about Kamala's strange accent change comes from author and political commentator Matt Walsh, who wrote, "Kamala seems to have developed sudden-onset urban accent, a condition that the last female presidential candidate suffered from." This is obviously in reference to former candidate Hillary Clinton and the fact that her accent seemed to change depending on the state she was speaking in that day. In fact, Hillary's accent changed so much over time that there are entire dedicated YouTube videos based on her accent's evolution. When she was speaking to New Yorkers, she tried to speak with a northeastern tone to her voice, and when she was trying to speak with more southern states, she developed a twang to her voice. Now, Hillary Clinton received a lot of negativity based on her accent changes, with some people even saying that she was appropriating the accent. Well, that's exactly what's happening with Kamala, and she needs to be careful with her campaign because her opponents are going to point that out whenever they face her for a debate. Kamala's accent change wasn't the only cringy part of her Georgia campaign rally, though, as VP Harris also brought out popular hip-hop artist Megan Thee Stallion to perform before taking the stage. Now, this isn't unusual. Most presidential candidates will receive some celebrity endorsements, and oftentimes will bring one or two on stage with them to help pull in votes. But what was VP Harris thinking? She had Megan Thee Stallion perform before taking the stage, and instead of performing a song that would be fitting of a campaign rally, Thee Stallion performed the song Body. For those of you who don't know, the song's lyrics go, "Body crazy, curvy, wavy, big titties, lil waist." Megan Thee Stallion was smart enough to censor herself as she rapped and performed, but that doesn't excuse the fact that this was the song used to bring out the Democratic presidential candidate. Imagine going to a political rally and having dancers in half suits twerking in your face, because that's what happened, and it was beyond cringy.
So the one thing we know for sure about Kamala Harris is we should all be very, very grateful to have her because she's historic for reasons that no one ever explains. But there's a lot we don't know about Kamala Harris. Most people probably don't know she really grew up in Canada. That's where she went to high school. She's not from this country in that sense, or she's certainly also from Canada. Okay, didn't know that. Doesn't mean that she's not going to be a good vice president, but why haven't we heard that? Well, we know her first meaningful job in politics was given to her by her boyfriend at the time, who's married, Willie Brown, the most powerful Democrat in California. But we know that Willie Brown is not the only powerful person she dated. And this is pretty interesting. We're not exactly sure what to make of it. But it turns out that Kamala Harris also dated the tabloid TV show host Montel Williams.
Long before she met Doug Emhoff, she dated some prominent men, including in 2001, former talk show host Montel Williams. Back then, he was the famous one and had to introduce her to the paparazzi.
So we know that Montel Williams called her Kamala. We also know she calls herself Kamala sometimes. But that's kind of all we know. So what was that relationship like? What did Montel Williams think of it? Because that might be one of those blanks we'd like to fill in. Anyway, he is always welcome on this show. Meantime, we know that Kamala Harris having some problems as vice president. CNN has just published this report. And by the way, they spent a long time telling us how great she is and how thrilled we should be to have her. But now they're telling us, this is the name of the piece, exasperation and dysfunction inside Kamala Harris's frustrating start as vice president.
This wasn't the first time that Kamala has been known to do outlandish stunts to garner attention and votes, though. In fact, Tucker Carlson, former Fox News host, was one of the first to expose Kamala for her secretive background and oddly fast rise to power. A few years ago, as Kamala was making a name for herself as the new vice president, Carlson took a moment to point out her strange background growing up, and the fact that she spent many of her formative years living outside of the United States and going to school in Canada. Tucker also points out that many of her previous romantic partners have helped her along the way, including Willie Brown, who supposedly gave Kamala her first job in politics. Going back a little further, though, Carlson also pointed out that Harris used to be involved with Montel Williams, the tabloid TV host.
So all politicians have people who imitate them, who do impressions of them. Kamala Harris is one of the few who really doesn't, and that's because Kamala Harris herself is doing a Kamala Harris impression. There is no actual Kamala Harris. And so it's kind of a meta question. It's very tough. It's very difficult to pull off the rambling incompetence and the cackling.
Before we get to all that,
I am Kamala Harris.
my name is Vice President Kamala Harris, first woman VP.
My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman sitting at the table wearing a blue suit.
My pronouns are she and her. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Blue suit, one of many. My pants are Old Navy, and school buses are yellow.
Because think about it, yellow school buses are our nation's largest form of mass transit.
Yeah, largest form of mass transit. So clearly, the impersonator you saw, whose name is Esty, has the kind of faintly hallucinogenic quality down, but it's the cackle that she really nailed. The cackle, can you just do that again? I think you perfected it.
Hello, America.
Yeah, what? I don't know.
Hi, Tucker.
I don't know if I don't know if you live with others, roommate, spouse, friends, whatever. When you do that cackle around other people, like how do they respond?
Sometimes they leave the room. It really depends on what team they're playing for.
Just for masochistic reasons, can you do one more time? That is so perfect. So the State of the Union is coming up next week. Do you have a preview for us?
Well, Tucker, I really want to make sure that we can galvanize our time. And when we get there, we want to lead Joe into the passage of time, but really we don't want it to be too much into the passage. We're going to have a Venn diagram explaining everything, and hopefully there will be yellow school buses.
Does it change the way you feel about yourself that you're able to do something like this?
Well, it started very, very differently for me. I downloaded TikTok during the pandemic, like many other very bored Americans, amongst other people around the world, and one of the followers told me that I had actually sounded like her, and I replied to the video, And after that, the requests just kept on coming in.
No, and you never will. Peace be upon her. We're going to go out of this with an actual Kamala, whatever, cackle, just so our viewers can see how perfect your imitation is. Esty, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And here's the real thing.
While Tucker was a host on Fox News, he even decided to pick apart Kamala's laugh to the point where he called it a cackle, and even interviewed an impersonator and had them try to teach him how to laugh like her. In the clip, he claims that Kamala is actually making an impression of herself, which is why she supposedly seems so unrealistic. The impersonator is clearly having a good time at Harris's expense, and the vice president certainly made it easy for her.
An hour from right now, the vice presidential debate begins in Salt Lake City, Utah. It is a legitimate news event, obviously, but we're going to be honest with you. Under normal circumstances, we wouldn't give it exactly breathless coverage. It's not that interesting. Nothing about the vice presidency is very interesting. Quick, who did Hillary Clinton run with 4 years ago? If you guessed some guy, you're squarely in the majority of most Americans, but don't feel bad about it. History barely records the names of winning VP candidates. Even in Paris Hill, Maine, there are some who've never heard of him. Nelson Rockefeller became vice president of the United States under Gerald Ford. What do you do all day? Someone once asked him. I go to funerals, Rockefeller said. I go to earthquakes. And that was a fair description. With the exception of Dick Cheney, every modern vice president has been utterly subordinate to the leader he has served. Most vice presidents are afterthoughts in this country, and that was especially true of Joe Biden. Obama refused to endorse Joe Biden for president, presumably for the good of the country. What's interesting, and what's sad in a way, is that years later, Joe Biden is still in the same role. If he's elected president, Joe Biden would remain the junior partner in the White House. Biden will be 78 on Inauguration Day. It's hard to imagine he would finish a full term. But even if he does, Kamala Harris is more than 20 years younger. She's sharper, more aggressive, and far more in tune with the radical spirit of the modern Democratic Party. So tonight we'll be airing the vice presidential debate, but what we'll actually be looking at is Kamala Harris's audition for the presidency. That's the office she's running for, no matter what they tell you. The debate itself will look weirder than most of them do. Harris and Mike Pence will be separated on stage by sheets of plexiglass, like the checkout counter in an inner-city liquor store. The Biden campaign demanded this. Actual scientists laughed at it. There's no measurable health benefit to doing it, but whatever. One thing they are really serious about, though, is ideology. They're not kidding. Kamala Harris has an agenda, a real one. Over this hour, we'll take a close look at what she would do as our functional president. Those details haven't been much discussed in the media, you may have noticed. Most of the coverage has centered on questions like, how do you say her name? By the way, Joe Biden still doesn't know. He regularly mispronounces it. Most of the rest of the coverage of Harris has consisted of warnings that we had better go easy on her.
Her team is also aware of the unfair gendered stereotypes that she might be up against. Secretary Hillary Clinton advising Senator Harris to be assertive, to be firm, but also to not do so too strongly as to be seen as aggressive. Unfair, to be sure, but that's the advice coming from the first female nominated to be a presidential candidate 4 years ago.
Oh, gender stereotypes. What MSNBC didn't bother to explain is how, in a world where we're required to pretend that gender categories aren't real, how in that world can gender stereotypes even exist? What exactly does that mean? Leave Kamala Harris alone or we will hurt you. We'll smear you as a bigot if you attack her. Good luck getting a job after we're done. Harris herself has done this many times. She's a seasoned pro at hiding behind her own identity. Last fall, for example, polls showed her losing her home state in the Democratic primary. That's pretty embarrassing. But Harris had an explanation for it. Californians are racists. Americans in general are racist. That's why they don't love me.
I describe and what I believe to be the elephant in the room about my campaign.
What is that?
Electability.
What do you mean?
Electability. You know, essentially, is America ready for a woman and a woman of color to be president of the United States?
America was ready for a black man to be president of the United States.
And this conversation happened for him. There is a lack of ability or a difficulty in imagining that someone who we have never seen can do a job that has been done, 45 times.
A lot of racist Democratic primary voters out there. The weird thing is all of these secret racist Democrats voted for Barack Obama twice in a row. And that's pretty strange behavior for racists. Maybe it's Harris's Indian side they object to. Or maybe the whole explanation is a ludicrous crock of nonsense that doesn't even make sense. More likely, voters don't like Kamala Harris because she is a transparent fraud, from her phony inflected accent to her synthetic bio to her featherweight work history. Joe Biden's corn pop story is more real than anything about Kamala Harris, and it's not even true. That's why they've told Harris to start using the phrase, speaking the truth. Maybe voters will think she is.
One of the most important values that I think we must fight for is to speak truth. To speak truth. We have to speak truth about it. We speak truth, and we are loyal. That we speak truth.
Let's speak truth. Let's speak another truth.
Let's speak truth. We must all speak truth. So let's speak some truth.
Tucker has always subscribed to the idea that there was nothing authentic about Kamala Harris, and he's been very vocal about that. He even mentioned that Kamala Harris was going to essentially be in control of the Biden administration while he was in office. He brought this up nearly 4 years ago, and it's arguably more relevant than ever right now. He believed that while Biden was in office, Kamala would be able to bulldoze her over his opinion. This is because of how much younger and more radical VP Harris was than Biden, and that's exactly what we're seeing other Fox hosts like Jesse Waters talk about nowadays.
And you all helped us win in 2020, and we're going to do it again in 2024. Yes, we will. So,
true measure of character, a wise man once said, is not whether you make a mistake, all of us do, but whether you learn from that mistake. With those words in mind, we'd like to begin tonight with an admission. It's contrition night on Fox News. It is time to reassess our view of Kamala Harris. Now, if you watch the show, you know that for more than a year now, we've had a pretty conventional understanding of this country's first black/Indian/part Canadian vice president, who also happens to identify as a woman. Assume she earned her low approval numbers. And we're not alone in that. Lots of other people have come to the very same conclusion. There's currently a debate among software engineers about whether Harris is even of biological origin, or instead the product of a classified government AI project gone wrong. We don't know the answer, but we certainly understand the question. She's that synthetic. So again, until the other day, we assumed that people don't like Kamala Harris because she's highly unlikable. But we're here tonight to tell you that assumptions can change, even assumptions rooted in overwhelming evidence and observable reality. Sometimes, and this happens, your entire worldview can flip upside down instantly, invert in a flash of light. Ask Saul of Tarsus. Our Road to Damascus experience came when we saw this clip of Joy Reid from MSNBC doing a drive time radio show.
I think for Kamala Harris, she's had like the triple problem of being a woman, and so people not being willing to respect her the way that they would respect a male vice president, of being black, which we already know that what that carries with it is the anti-blackness comes, with the package, and then also being vice president at a time that is really, really difficult.
Joy and I talk about this all the time. Madam Vice President, and you know this, Charlene, she black, okay?
Yes.
She went to Howard, she AK, and when she talks to you, it is, she sounds
She's so
like
regular.
me. She's so regular
She
and
really
approachable,
is.
and it's unfortunate that more people don't see that.
Have you internalized it? Have you brought it deep inside? Let it marinate a little bit? People who don't like Kamala Harris are sexist, obviously, because like Admiral Rachel Levine, she identifies as a woman too. They're also racist because Kamala Harris is the daughter of a Jamaican college professor, duh. And by the way, they're also stupid by definition. They know nothing about civics or American politics. It's the dumbing down of America. Unlike Kamala Harris, you don't, quote, understand how things work. You're the problem. Your racism is hurting Kamala Harris's political career. Damn you, bigot. And then we realize, how's this for mind-bending? Joy Reid was talking about us. And then we broke down and shed the bitter tears of self-awareness. And our journey of education began. We wanted to know more. So we found an interview that Joy Reid recently did with a black supremacist website called The Root, a website that's now a permanent fixture in our favorites tab. So naturally, she's got a gut-level understanding of the historic black experience in America, the way you do when you're from Denver and went to Harvard. You just feel it. It's just part of you. The way it's part of Kamala Harris after growing up in Montreal. As Joy Reid put it, quote, Kamala's just a regular sister, in the same way people would always say that Michelle Obama is like your sister if your cousin became First Lady. Kamala Harris is like if your cousin became Vice President of the United States. I think she doesn't get to show that personality often enough, and so people haven't had a chance to know her. Why hadn't we realized that before? Well, as Joy Reid pointed out, quote, most of the media is still white and male. Of course. Those damn white males, always hiding the sister-cousin connection. That's what they do. But for us, the veil had been lifted. We could see for the first time what our racism had blinded us to for so long. And the truth hurt. It was so painful that for days we had to wear sunglasses even indoors. But it was worth it, because at that point began a journey of contrition and self-discovery that honestly was long overdue. How could we be so darn racist? That's the question we're asking ourselves tonight in the fading light of this year's Juneteenth observance. So that was the old us. We've shed it like a snakeskin. It's time to change. It's time to do better. It's time to think anew tonight about what we thought we knew about Kamala Harris. So we're going to take a look at some of the sound bites we have mocked on this show over the last year and a half. And boy, doesn't it feel good just to admit fault?
One of the most important values that I think we must fight for is to speak truth. And we will speak truth about the injustice. We will speak truth about the inequity. We will speak truth about the unfairness.
And let's speak truth. Let's speak truth. So let's speak some truth.
And we must speak truth no matter how uncomfortable it may be to hear.
So our assumption, really for decades, was that politicians who make a habit of using the word truth are probably, really by definition, lying. That's why they say truth so often. I'm not cheating, I promise. But what really struck us, the old us, was the fact that Kamala or Kamala, you know, it doesn't matter how you pronounce her name. It just doesn't matter. That's the other thing we've realized. She doesn't know how, neither do we. We'll admit it. But what struck us was that she repeats the same line again and again and again. And our old reaction to this was derision. Not exactly Socrates, that was the phrase we used. She's got what it takes to repeat herself verbatim for days at a time, behaving as if each time is the first time. We stand corrected, and we stand in awe. Here she was in May, telling us about the importance of, and we're quoting, working together.
We will work together and continue to work together to address these issues, to tackle these challenges, and to work together as we continue to work operating from the new norms, rules, and agreements that we will convene to work together on.
So again, we laughed at that clip. We've done it more than once. It feels good to admit it. At the time, we assumed Kamala Harris just got lost in the middle of a sentence. She couldn't find her way out. Together, working together. How do I get out of this sentence? Together. But now we see what was really happening here.
I just love the idea of exploring the unknown. And then there's other things that we just haven't figured out or discovered yet. To think about so much that's out there that we still have to learn. Like, I love that. I love that. And so I'm very excited about the Space Council.
We're going to learn so much as we increasingly, I think, are curious and interested in the potential for the discoveries and the work we can do in space. So that's one of the things I'm most excited about. With your own eyes, I'm telling you, it is going to be unbelievable.
So for humanitarian reasons, we're not going to play you that whole video, but it's online. If you dare, look it up. Watch it again. Watch your own soul die as you do. It's the fakest thing that's ever been caught on video, but in fact, it's even faker than it looks. We've just learned that one of the kids that Kamala Harris was lecturing at is in fact not a normal kid. He's a child actor called Trevor who auditioned for that role. No political party that believed in democracy and thought it had to win over voters would ever put up someone like Kamala or Kamala Harris for office. So what does this tell us? Thanks so much for coming on. So I don't know if you dared to watch that whole thing, and I'm not just being mean for political reasons. I've never seen anything that fraudulent in my whole life.
it is really a bizarre thing to watch. And it's just, the thing that's bizarre, it's like you question yourself, has she ever even been around children, by the way?
Right.
These are, as you reported, this is somebody who was a child actor who reached out to his agent and asked to get this part. He was called back weeks later and said, yes, you got the part to star along the Vice President of the United States and try to normalize and humanize her, which he, unfortunately for him, he failed at because it's hard to humanize Kamala Harris. He's speaking like they're 5 years old,
right,
using the expressions and using her hands as if you're reading The Hungry, Hungry Caterpillar to a kindergarten class. It's so scripted. There's nothing authentic about her at all. And then you wonder, to me personally, whenever I watch her, I wonder forget whether or not she wants to be in front of children. Does she even want to be the vice president? I think that's a question that's on a lot of Americans' minds when it comes to her. I think that people that are accurately reporting that there seems to be this shade war going on between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, I think that's accurate. I think she genuinely resents being the vice president of the United States. She genuinely resents being subordinate to Biden, and she genuinely resents every element of her job, including scripted elements like the one that we had to watch just tonight.
Because, it's a different level. They're all phony. All politicians are phony. Every single one of them are all weird, creepy personal lives. Got it. But she's so phony that her phoniness is an act of aggression aimed at her audience. She's daring you to watch her without vomiting. She's literally that phony.
She's so unlikable. It's hard to think that they could ever put forth a woman that was more unlikable than Hillary Clinton, but by God, the Democrat Party has done it. I find her to be more unbearable and more unlikable than Hillary Clinton somehow. And it's because it's the acting behind it. It's the phony laugh. It's the cackling laugh, And again, to have to go out and get actors. We see Joe Biden appearing in front of a set at the EEOB. We've got Kamala Harris hiring child actors. What is actually going on in this administration? This really does feel like it's a Saturday Night Live skit. It's like, do we have people that are actually running our country, or do we have actors that are just sitting around, saying what they're supposed to say, reading off of teleprompters? Why don't they just let us read the teleprompter? It'd be much easier.
I was told the morning after the debate by a senior House Democratic source, and the quote was, this was unsustainable. And they thought that the president had not been served very well by people around him, and just didn't think that this was going to last very much longer, depending on how long you look here. I think it is significant that the president now has just endorsed Vice President Harris, because there are a lot of people on Capitol Hill, especially the Congressional Black Caucus, who will be okay with that. People kept talking about the concept of having a brokered convention. I pointed out to people that it wouldn't necessarily be a brokered convention, but it would be a convention. The idea that, these delegates, these people who have voted for President Biden and Harris in the primaries here, those delegates are pledged to them, but not bound to them until they have that roll call vote. Supposed to be an electronic roll call vote in early August. That'll probably change in some form now, depending on what happens, or some people will probably push for the convention quickly. We were starting to get statements, Mike, from vulnerable Democrats. Kim Schreier, who's a Democrat from Washington State, Tammy Baldwin, who's a Democratic senator in Wisconsin. That's a battleground state there, and immediately endorsing what President Biden has done here, because things were not going to look good for people who represent districts in states like that down ballot. They're starting to say, look, if the president cannot run for re-election, then he ought to step down. How is he fit to serve?
Right.
And, we're going to have inquiries this week, Mike, into the shooting of former President Trump. There might be inquiries into this as to what the health of the president might be.
Chad, I covered former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi day in and day out with you for a decade. You've covered her for several decades. What about her role in terms of trying to convince President Biden it was time for a change and basically trying to protect her Democratic members?
It was obvious, just not from Pelosi, but others who had a hand in this, that they had to address what was going to happen down ballot. And the idea was to start with a gentle push, and then it started to be more of a wave, and then it started to be a tidal wave, and then it was getting to maybe a tsunami. In fact, I think that we were probably going to have some of this last week had it not been for the shooting a week ago. It was a week ago Saturday that Chuck Schumer went to Rehoboth, did not announce this, and met with President Biden. Where 2 weeks ago we had this conference call among House Democrats where many of them were starting to say very frank things and throw him under the bus and say, in the words of Don Beyer, he was feeble and they liked him, but he couldn't put two sentences together. information from that leaked out, and then members had to dial it back because it was obvious this wasn't going as quickly as they thought it could go, Mike. Yeah, that's something that they were very concerned about, losing, all three, the House, the Senate, and the White House. Holding the Senate is a tough battle to start with. That's going to be very challenging for the Democrats, no matter what. And that's why you had people like Sherrod Brown and John Tester coming out. Brown this Friday, but Tester a little bit earlier, saying, look, it's time for you to step aside, Mr. President. The House, they always thought that was within range. They had trouble passing defense bills. They burned through 2 speakers, couldn't elect multiple people as speaker, trying all sorts of resolutions all the time. Democrats would always point to the loudest people in the room, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. You get the idea here. And so they're like, if we can't beat that, then, we're not doing anything right at all. And so that's where I think that this was kind of a salvaging process here. People just don't know, does it help? And, keep in mind that Democrats have been tarred by this for a while now, that you've had Republicans. I remember this early on.
The narrative around Kamala Harris hasn't changed in the past 4 years. The only difference now is that she's running for president instead of running as the vice president. What will this mean for America should Kamala start to actually poll ahead? No one can really say. I'm curious to hear your opinion, though. What do you think about Kamala Harris and her cringy campaign? Do you think she even meant to put on that fake accent, or did she just get caught up in the moment? Be sure to let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.